I don't think our entrepreneurs are not risk takers. I just don't think our culture is set up to accept those risk takers.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the BetaKit Podcast. I am Douglas Saltis, editor-in-chief of BetaKit, and along with my co-host, Rob Kennedy, we're here to talk to you today about the Twitter redesign. No, we would never do that. We would never waste your time on that. What we are going to do is another storied edition of our fan-favorite AMA episodes with a slight twist. This week, we do not have a special guest because we are in the middle of summer, and we like to be respectful of friends of the pod. So we're going to turn this from a friendly engagement into a game of Question Battleship, where Rob and I go back and forth trying to stump the other with the questions you submitted for us, honestly, to try and stump us. What we're telling you is that we have no guest human shield today, so we're turning on each other. Rob, how do you feel about this?
Checkmate.
Checkmate. And I think, I fired off the first shot. I tweeted out some photos of me, you, and our podcast producer, Katie, from Startup Fest that were not flattering for any of us as a way to drum up interest in this.
It really worked.
We
trolled ourselves into questions.
Yeah, the problem with trolling for engagement is that when it works, you're reinforcing the wrong behavior, which is, I think, reflected in some of the questions. I would say this is a pretty good swath of questions here. We got a little summary vibe check. We got people who are maybe looking to keep this a little bit lighter. And then we've got some hard-hitting policy questions. I think we should note we are recording this the morning that it should be announced that the federal government is having a pretty significant cabinet shuffle that will be impacting our reporting and lives of citizens in some ways. I was teased last night, should be coming down probably by the time we're done this podcast.
Yes, as soon as the recording stops.
Great booking on our part. Perfect scheduling. But we've got a unique blend. And Rob, because I, without your permission, shared a photo of us looking absolutely ridiculous in Montreal after coming off stage from our live podcast, I will give you first shot to try and sink my question battleship. Choose a question. I double dog dare you. You will not stump me.
All right. Well, since you did that, let's start with an easy one. So because of that cabinet shuffle.
God damn it. I try to give our listeners and viewers context, and then now I'm.
I hope you've had your coffee, listeners, because this is we're starting hardcore. So it would appear that the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Industry, Francois-Philippe Champagne, and Stephen Guilbeault, the Climate Change and Environment Minister, seem to be keeping their portfolios. There seem to be 2 of 4.
As we know at 9:36 in the morning
exactly.
while we're recording. Yes.
Nonetheless, what the question was, what hope do we have that Canada will get a real innovation strategy, which is a hot take, and the announced promised over a year and a half, so the last budget, cleantech tax credits. Will they actually materialize? I think BetaKit had a story just the day ago about the that we're falling behind in clean tech. So
we actually dropped this, I think, right at the end of June.
Okay.
Following Collision, we spoke.
That's
to
all
people.
A day ago.
I believe there was a recent report that came out showcasing how impactful these tax credits would be relative to the United States if they were to actually ever materialize. I think we should take a step back when we're talking about this, and I would strongly recommend, and we'll probably link to it in the show notes, checking out Jared Linson's piece on this, because he's quoting several smart people in the clean tech, climate tech space in Canada who have been, I think, watching the policy since 2022, because this stuff, it's going to be a theme, was initially conceived or announced during Budget 2022 and then kind of re-announced during Budget 2023. And hey, by the way, it's cabinet shuffle summer. Budget 2023 was a couple months ago, nowhere to be seen. We recently had Ben Bergen of CCI on, I think, for our last guested AMA, which was all policy all the time, super weighty. And he actually openly questioned whether or not this government had an innovation strategy. And I think the key takeaway from that is, there is a way to conceive and implement an interlacing series of policies that holistically addresses the need for Canada to modernize its economy, its approach to digital ways of life, and the fact that the earth is on fire. That seems to be the opposite of what our government is doing for the most part, at least in the holistic sophistication of these interlocking parts, and versus, let's say, job grabs with major global corporates. The other side of that, the other component is this federal government is really good at re-announcing things that it's already announced that fails to be implemented. Whether you're talking about open banking, the SR&ED review, these cleantech tax credits, major points on the initiative, but then marked an F because the paper was submitted weeks, months, years too late. And I think a lot of the frustration here is coming from seeing another file in, say, the broad innovation portfolio being incomplete because it hasn't been turned in yet. So what hope do I have that Canada will get a real innovation strategy and that the announced and promised clean tax credits will actually materialize? Perchance that today's shuffle might light a fire under some butts to deliver. But I think we have to go back to what Ben said on this podcast, where it's like, it's not like they were looking to implement a holistic strategy in the first place. And this isn't, this is across the innovation portfolio. They're like, we keep having, frankly, very frustrated conversations with a variety of people about how behind this government is on moving the needle in any way policy wise. So I'm not very hopeful that this stuff is going to materialize to either combat what the U.S. is doing with their major omnibus bill that we've quoted several people in BetaKit saying, hey, this is going to draw companies, investment, talent. Jared Story notes a lot of that. And I don't know if it's going to come in time to capture the benefits that I think we'll link to the Globe report that noted, like, if those credits actually were implemented, that would be a real boon. I know we've had some Brian Watson, now of Enbridge, co-drafted an op-ed, I think around the budget time, basically saying, here's how impactful these clean tech tax credits could be. He's a real tax credit guru guy. Yeah. So he, and as well as aligned on the clean tech, climate tech standpoint. So I'm not really hopeful at all. But Rob, I'm wondering, do you have a take on this? This is where I counter Battleship and say, you missed my boat.
It's tough. I mean, like, I'd be interested to know whether, does the context of the type of government that they're in, is it a minority government? Does that block them in any way? I'm curious to know.
That's a great point. So
whether
because this is the second minority government, right?
Yes.
But these are things that these minority governments have had on their. I don't think that there's any delay in them just rolling out stuff that they've laid out in the budget, right?
No, I don't know. I don't know what compromises they have to make in budgets. I'm not a politician, but I'm curious. And I mean, I'm not using that to get anybody off the hook. I think what's also been interesting, we've had a lot of episodes of this pod where we've talked about some of the policies that have been put in place across not just purely in innovation land, where there is, the AI and privacy stuff that we're talking about. We're talking about news and how that's funded, how you should compensate creators. That's across a bunch of different files in the government. So there is motion happening there. We've talked about that with Senator Deakin and Rain Maida when we had that episode about, like, how do we compensate folks who are creators in Canada and how do we create new policy there? I think that maybe we're good at the policy and not the figuring out how to execute and roll out the kind of things. I also think that there still seems to be, I mean, we just came off a month of conference festival season.
That's why
we're very, very
so
tired. Yes, I'm not pale. I actually am very tanned. This is just me tired.
Yeah, it's a bright outdoor sheen that we developed.
Where there's, like, I think we still have to. We think we as a country have yet to see that sort of, like, leadership role from both the government and the private sector, where we're not waiting for the government to do a thing. I'm not saying that we shouldn't rely on government subsidies at all. I'm saying, where is the desire for leadership here, both from a government and a societal, like, where are the entrepreneurs who are creating these things that require that stuff? Like, there's been lots of announcements about, like, what was it yesterday? I think you reported on the, I forget the name of the thing that the government just said. There's, like, this scale.
The Hypergrowth. coalition of
Hypergrowth
companies.
thing.
Yes.
So there's like, let's focus on those
Ministering
things.
has a new they've just selected a series of companies that they're hoping to help get to $1 billion ARR and a certain headcount component to create more anchor companies in Canada, which is really interesting because this is Minister Ng's portfolio. Generally, she's been focused on exporting Canadian products and services internationally, and obviously one of the scaling components here is getting Canadian companies to be global companies. So that's very interesting. Now it is also this government is now picking winners.
Yes.
But so I want to go back to something you said before, because
Sure.
you're like, maybe we're just really good at policy and not implementing it. Going back to what Ben had told us, I'm not sure if we're actually good at policy or if we're good at making announcements.
Yes.
We're going to talk about the talent component here, the whole H-1B visa thing that is just, again, Jared Linson writing a lot of really interesting policy stuff for us during the summer. We've been farming that out quite effectively. Half of that announcement, while the 10,000 applicants for the H-1B visa, which we'll get to, very interesting and interesting, unique, the broad swath of the minister's talent announcement, which was on stage at Collision, was just announcing that stuff the government had already been doing was now coming back to the timeline. It's like the fast track visa is actually going to be fast again. So I think it's interesting that you're noting the things that this government doesn't seem to want or able to move forward. And then things like the Online Streaming Act or the, what's the stupid name of this dumb bill? The Online News Act have actually been ramrodded through and are now law. I just don't know if it's like we're struggling to implement the policy, and I'm not really sure how much policy there was there versus like flat announcement.
No, and you're not like, I think I want to be optimistic. I mean, we've had how many supercluster conversations have we had in the last 8 years of doing this show?
We actually downgraded superclusters to just normal clusters.
Yes, now to cluster whatever. But it's really interesting because I guess the thread that I'm personally frustrated with is this isn't just a government thing. Like at Startup Fest, we were speaking to like a bunch of investors there, and one of them noted to me, at least, that
we were networking.
Yes, schmoozing. They're like, which VC fund in Canada is deploying any capital at all? Basically none. So there seems to be this systemic
gaps in where capital's. Yes,
exactly. So I'm not giving a free pass. The government, I think we have an opportunity to do something and to actually execute on these things. So I would like to see those things happen. I agree. I'm cynical and skeptical about our ability to do anything, quite frankly. And it's just disappointing, especially when the Americans pass the Infrastructure Act, where they have huge investments in their economy, where they can make game-changing decisions, like game-changing, society-changing things. It seems strange to me that if I were in a position of power now, I would want to do those kinds of things that will, A, get me reelected, B, actually create impact in our society to hit the goals from a climate perspective, from an innovation perspective. We have an opportunity now to do those things. Yeah. So I just don't understand the blocker, quite frankly.
I don't either. And I think maybe we talked to Ben a little bit about this, but I don't think in any of the conversations that in that policy AMA, which I guess we're going to link to now, because there's a lot of meat that we're referring to.
If you really want to get nerdy,
he was really indicating that there were specific, contentious parliament discussions around at least some of these things. I think some of these things are just on the government to get done, and they have not been getting it done. And in contrast to what the U.S. has done with that massive omnibus bill that is like in place and affecting change right now, we have a real activity versus impact gap between our governments, which I think everyone in Canada really, really feels. The other thing that you talked about, though, because it duly noted, there are investment gaps in Canadian tech, and there are certain things that we should just not rely upon the government to do for us. The fact that BDC seems to be the only fund throwing like t-shirt cannoning money at Startup Fest elsewhere for very specific purposes aligned towards sustainability goals and impact, right? That has however you might feel about how thoughtfully that money is being deployed or what the relative impact is being, hey, that's a dollar commitment and people working to do something that the current ecosystem isn't incentivized to do maybe, or requires that support. Most of the things that we're talking about here when it comes to open banking, which is a competition thing, clean tech tax credit thing, which is more of an international competition thing and a brain drain thing. ADA provisions, like how we're going to regulate and deal with AI. Like Joshua Bengio was just testifying to the Americans this week saying, pass laws now. We can kind of go down the list. Most of this stuff is beyond the scope of any individual Canadian or Canadian corporation. This is the policy frameworks that allow us to function. So I think we should, we're well served to separate Canadian founders and entrepreneurs who are maybe like looking to the government to lead on stuff that they could figure out themselves, and stuff where it's like you have Canadian founders who can't compete with incumbents because the government won't give them the opportunity to. And I think those are, we should not throw the baby out with the bathwater in our criticisms of that. But will this cabinet shuffle change that? Well, this episode is coming out after I hope you truly enjoyed our conversation with Jesse Wente. And it's coming right now as the press, I checked, the press conference was happening as we're recording.
Of course. You
know, the things that have gone through when it comes to the Streaming Act and the Online News Act that have been pushed through, the minister responsible for that, no longer the minister, the heritage minister. So very contentious things that actually made it through, like making change happen. Minister who made that stuff happen, no longer responsible for dealing with the ramifications of it. And I think
it's gonna be fun.
Hope battery, trust battery, real low right now. Wonderful question.
Should we do a second question?
I think we should.
Look at you ask a second question.
20 minutes in the AMA.
Yeah, okay, we're almost done.
We're back, baby. It's like we never left. Okay, so do we want to maybe even follow up and carry this thread? Because we did get, again, god damn it. You always, these questions come in like two different formats. People responding publicly to our requests being like, yo, when is Douglas going to wear a different hat? And then we get the private DMs where they don't indicate whether or not they want to be named, which is why we're not saying the names of these people. And it's like, here's 3 paragraphs on the H-1B visa program. Please systematically address all of my concerns.
Yes. In alphabetical order.
But this was a DM'd question, again, in response to our reporting, so we really appreciate it. You ran a story on the impact of the H-1B visa program. Jared Lindsay, again, just came out. This is the government announced updates of streamlining of our approach to talent. One of the components is that we were just going to accept 10,000 applicants of people in the United States who had that H-1B visa, just saying, hey, if you've been struggling to get into the United States with that or stay in the United States because their system is a mess, we'll just take you. Just come on over. I think within, it was like something like the 24 hours, those 10,000 slots were filled. A lot of people are very, very excited about this as like successfully implemented policy, or at least a trial balloon allowing us to capture talent. But there are other components to this. And the question is, you ran a story on the impact of the H-1B visa program. What are you hearing on the ground on this? Canadian opinion on immigration seems more complex than ever due to the pressures of the housing crisis. I should note, there's a political component to this beyond our ballywick usually, where we're talking about Canada's been accepting a greater number of immigrants annually than ever before. We just passed the $40 million Canadian threshold, which as someone remembering as a child being like, whoa, we're hitting 30, that's nuts, is we out here aging consistently or rapidly, depending upon which summer tech conference we're at. But there's also a huge housing crisis that we're dealing with. So, which makes the immigration question fraught, because there are Canadians living today in the city that we're recording in, that if they make minimum wage, or even like slightly or significantly higher than minimum wage, they actually can't afford to live in the city of Toronto or many of the other major cities.
And a current crisis literally on the streets right now, where there's refugees who can't even find
Yes.
interim housing
Yes.
because we can't afford it.
Yes. Like asylum seekers do not have a place to seek that.
To not get wet.
Yes. And they're living on the streets because our city is bankrupt and our federal government was incredibly and embarrassingly slow to react. So I think we need to separate out the policy consideration of like, hey, for a minister to know that one of the easiest ways for Canada to grab high net worth individuals, strong portfolio of talented people, I would say broadly tech aligned, like the H-1B visa isn't like a tech visa, but a lot of people are coming to the States to work in tech on that because they're, I would say, generally knowledge workers, is a really smart, like it. All they had to do was stand on stage, announce it, put up a website, and 10,000 people applied. Like that moves faster than a lot of things we see in our government.
Mm-hmm.
But it is still coming in a context where people can't afford to live in our major cities. Houses are not being built anywhere near fast enough, and there doesn't seem to be any sort of consistent policy to allow for that. All of our social services are either under duress or being actively undermined, and there's some real like end of the world energy happening, and as we just talked, a low trust in our federal government to solve these problems. So that can really conflict the excitement that that this government can produce with one of these things. We also got some pointed criticism here. I'm wondering though, Rob, like your take, because when we drive home after this podcast in your nice vehicle, we often end up talking about housing because we happen to live in the same side of the city, and it comes up.
Mm-hmm.
What are you hearing on the ground related to this? What is maybe your informed opinion on immigration, which seems more complex than ever due to the pressures of the housing crisis and some of the other things I laid out, like just table setting? Where do you want to dig in on that? How does that maybe color your opinion of this H-1B visa program, particularly since you're a Canadian that worked in the United States? We used to do this pod remotely with us.
That's right. Yeah. Man, that's again, there's a lot to unpack there, and like there's structural issues, there's policy issues, there's tech and business of tech issues.
I'm kind of asking you to tell me where your boat is so I can hit it. I'm I'm giving you a portfolio.
No, I know. So I think there's a few things to unpack. First is it's interesting timing, given that we're not in a proper recession, but we're in a tech recession. So there's a lot of folks that are,
and maybe a proper recession is coming.
Yeah, maybe, and it's going to happen, real estate and all that things. But in the meantime, the industry that we talk about the most, which is tech, is shedding jobs. So bringing those people in now is a little less useful than it was maybe a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
So it's interesting timing from that perspective. I think that's not to say that, I mean, at the end of the day, we all know our population is aging and we're having less kids. So having skilled talent and moving us towards an innovation-focused economy, if we really truly believe that all the cylinders are firing and moving in that direction, then having that kind of immigration is good. Because we need people to fill those jobs. We just need to make sure that they're accredited and using their accreditations and not just throwing them in the garbage. There's the critique that James Shower posted on the post on LinkedIn.
Yeah. James Shower, who's an entrepreneur, a former colleague at Research in Motion. I actually think we didn't overlap during our time there, but I had many engagements with him back when I was covering BlackBerry, and she used to run like the default BlackBerry web page that you'd hit when you'd open up the browser.
No kidding. That's responsibility.
Once put my blog on as a news link there and got in a lot of trouble, but it gave us a lot of traffic, and I really appreciate it. So James but James has some hefty criticism of this program or this approach, right?
Well, the
the
TLDR is basically H-1B visas are gamed in the States. If you have the money and the resources, you can get an H-1B visa. And so
this isn't a qualification status.
Right.
Yeah.
It may be necessary, but not sufficient to actually be good at anything is, I think, the point that he's making. And it doesn't mean you're actually good. So, that is not necessarily a signal. And, being a little more focused and attuned to what the market needs and not just shotgunning it out there is maybe a better use of this policy. I think, and then also like there's like, his argument about like, does this also not only on the one hand is there a housing crisis, but then are we bringing in people who are willing to work for less money?
Yeah, we should read some of this. Right? So he's like, the simplest remedy for this, after noting that the just because you have an H-1B doesn't mean you're super smart, would be to tie the visa to a job. Employers are the ultimate deciders of who can bring material value. If ABC Software and Van, great company, I think the work website Acme, wants to hire a U.S. H-1B candidate, then it would be very intelligent for us to expedite the visa. That would be the big smart win for Canada to bring in fresh talent. But the crisis for housing and affordability, again, along with the question we've submitted, and software developers in Canada already working for half of U.S. wages, is very bad. Mm-hmm. If Canadians were not so passive, there would be riots, which I get. And I would say like 10,000 applicants. I don't think most Canadians are even worried about these 10,000 people, much in the way that they are worried about the fact that they can't afford to live and work in any of our major cities. But that's gonna reach a point of conflict. And even to what you're saying, aging population, not having kids, some of that is a factor of the economic circumstances preventing a new generation of people of like getting married, having kids, and having a place for them, right?
Yeah.
So let's say, as was indicated to us, now I'm honing in which ship I want to hit. It's like the small little 2-peg dinghy. Let's say, as CCI, again, we're noting that we spoke to them in relation to the story. Mm-hmm. If this is the 10K trial balloon and everyone seems to be happy, it's like great press, good win, blah, 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 and they're like 100,000 people.
Right.
Are we going to hit a point where we are now basically not solving any of the problems that current Canadians deal with, and we're just widening the funnel and allowing for churn at the bottom end? It's like we can't keep our users retained. So what we're going to do is just keep adding new knowledge workers,
right,
and just paint over the problem.
Yes, it's a great question. I think a few things. One is that I was in the States on what was called an L1 visa, mm-hmm. a different kind of visa,
big loser visa,
yeah. And the challenge with that is that I had to make a decision when I. Spoiler alert, everybody. When I was being pulled back to Toronto because we decided to not expand further into the States, I had to make a decision. Do I want to stay in America or do I want to come back to Canada?
Yeah.
And the decision I made was stay in Canada or come back to Canada because I have choice. In America, if my visa was tied to my employer, I couldn't start a business. I couldn't try to do different things. I was literally kind of... So that was not for me, being entrepreneurial, where we get a lot of innovation in our ecosystem is with immigrants and first generation Canadians. So tying them to employers does have that sort of side effect of reducing.
It's a two-sided sword to James' point here. And we were trying to we're still trying. The initial conceit of the story that we assigned to Jared was like, go talk to one of these applicants, mm-hmm. reach out to one of these 10,000 people. Let's interview them about why they would want to come to Canada and understand that, either because they are understanding their experience in the U.S. and why they might want to leave, which, spoilers, people, a lot of reasons, but then also why they might want to choose Canada, right. Like U.S. 0, like the light flavor. And we couldn't get a hold of anyone, mostly because a lot of these people probably don't want to publicly convey that they're applying for this because they might be changing circumstances. But through that process, we're hearing, there are people that are doing this because if their employment status is so mucked up in the US that if they don't get out and into Canada, they might be on another continent in 3 months. So this is the first best, least worst choice for them rather than a real proactive talent consideration. Now, I'm not saying we should be applying the full thoughtfulness to a 10,000 worker flyer here, but it does speak to that idea of like, is this for our benefit? Is it because things suck in the US? How does this make things better?
Well, I think two things to think about. Like, first of all, I'm not a policymaker, but I would imagine that it's like, do we not do things because we worry about the other affordances? Like, first of all, like the housing crisis is we have this weird internecine warfare. I mean, look at even the conferences we were at. It was like, no Vancouver, no Toronto, no Calgary, no Montreal.
We might have questions about that coming up.
So there's that kind of stuff that's happening. And the way that stuff is administered is locally. So it's like, are we not going to, as a country, are we not going to try because we think that it's going to break further down the machine?
So we haven't talked to these people yet. I'm really wondering how committed they are to being here, or if this is just a slightly better destination. And I'm wondering half the reason why there applies the proximity, or they have a perception of Canada right now that is a trailing indicator, which I would say most Canadians on all sides of the political spectrum, for whatever reasons, don't feel like we are crushing it.
Right.
And there's just so many signals from your local neighborhood to your province to the federal where we are just not operating at high efficiency. And I think throwing people into the mix on top of that might be a solve in a very targeted sense. But I to James's point, I don't think this even addresses, and might even be ignoring, the complex issues and pressures of housing crisis and some of the other considerations.
Well, okay, that was the two things I was going to say. The two other points I wanted to make were, one, look, that's a case where we did a marketing thing and it worked, right? Like, we are touting ourselves as a country. Hey,
recurring theme marketing.
Secondly, I think there's something to be said about if they, I think in the BetaKit piece where you talk to the CCI, the recommendation was crawl, walk, run.
Mm-hmm.
And if a lesson is learned from this, here are some considerations we didn't do. Let's do a test. Let's bring some immigrants in. Yeah. And then we can iterate on policy and say, here are the other considerations we need to make about how to make this better. Good, the test worked. If we just literally then go to 100,000 people and don't put any more thought into it, not a good test.
Yeah, and but the other side, following on the lines of what we were discussing, it also might be like, we did this great test and it was awesome press and everyone loved it. And then we commissioned a study.
Right.
And in budget 2024, we'll announce a thing that in budget 2025 gets reannounced
with a different government.
And election. It's, again, trust battery real low today. Hey, are you looking for a powerful, value-packed laptop to help you breeze through your daily tasks? Or maybe you're after a highly secure device you can comfortably take from the office to home and everywhere in between. Or are you looking for top-tier performance and style that lets you focus on making big business moves? Get exactly what you need in a laptop, plus enterprise-level security, remote reliability, and unrivaled support from Dynabook. Go to dynabook.computer right now to learn more.
Why don't we move to a different
mix
question?
Mix it up, man. What policy question are you going to hit me with
This is
now?
a question for you specifically. When is there going to be a tech takeover game at the Raptors?
Oh, okay. So this was I think one of those fun submitted questions that we received, which I really appreciate. I think there
Palate cleanser. This is the ginger of.
Yeah, this is like bring your disco record night thing,
Yes.
but for tech, I would say. And again, this is a very Toronto-focused question, but we could bring this out to any of the major cities and their major sports ball team. I actually, during Saskatchewan Startup Week last year, got to go see a Rough Riders game, so that was kind of like a little bit of a tech takeover. I would love to see something like this, but I would also posit that given how much prices for Raptors tickets have skyrocketed since about 2015, every night is a tech takeover night at a Raptors game because those people are there because they can pay for the ticket. But it would be cool knowing that, there was this really, in 2019, there was this bet between members of the Toronto tech community and SF between like who was going to win the finals, the Raptors or the Warriors. We absolutely stomped them. Oracle Arena, did you like having the last 3 games ever in your arena closing in losses as people chant "We the North" and sing "O Canada"? Did you like that? Because I loved it.
Smack Talk stars.
So there was some cool donations for charity there. I think basketball is the most tech aligned sport of the four major ones, I think, just because it represents a more diverse background of people. Ownership has changed. There's tech people that, whether from Chamath or Mark Cuban or others, like tech people own teams. I would love to participate or organize a tech takeover, if not for the full evening, even just like a section. And it would be so cool to have maybe some tech companies that have services or things like that get better integrated into some of our arenas, because
it'd be fun to do it like pan Canadian, almost like,
like
pick
a
a sport.
like
do
the
hockey
MLB
and...
stadium tour kind of thing.
Yeah.
Oh
Different
my God.
sport.
Okay, so I would say open call.
Yeah.
If someone wants to drop sizable amount of cash on our laps, we will do a podcast roast show, like the college ESPN game day, where they're just outside in front of the
We're gonna call
arena
games
on Saturdays, and we'll just do like a tailgate thing at a bunch of NBA, or we'll just go cross sport. We'll go pan sport. We're gonna keep this diverse and Canadian.
Exactly. Yeah.
We will show up at any place that will allow us to plug in microphones and podcasts.
Do you like lacrosse?
So if they're going to be sporting venues, we're there. I think this is a wonderful idea. Hopefully we clip this and this gets some momentum. But yeah, Raptors games are already tech takeover because they're the only people that can afford those tickets, particularly given the performance in the court in the last 2 years. Okay, let's do another fun one, Rob.
Okay.
This is us. We're reamassing our forces. This is the Christmas solstice where the two armies break. They agree to go okay, and then they
play
fight
some
back
baseball and then they go back and shoot each other.
So what should I hit you with here? Well, this is a summertime question. We've been referencing going to Startup Fest, a lot of other things. We'll do a live podcast on any stage that'll have us. This is a great question because I was literally on a call yesterday with a potential partner, and we were talking about the need to be wearing outside pants. And I think this is a post-COVID conversation, but I think it kind of relates. What is the new standard uniform attire in Canadian tech? What's being worn a lot more and a lot less? And having just come back from Startup Fest and seeing kind of the choices here, I wore a collared shirt for my first day at Startup Fest because I was moderating a bunch of content at Accelerate Fest and realized I was the most overdressed person in that room. Give me a vibe check on the uniform of tech right now.
I feel like that's an anomaly because it was outside and it was hot, sort of. Startup Fest
yes.
in terms of an attire thing. My I don't know, shit take on it is I don't want to say like business casual. Certainly lots of blazers for men. I'm not going to comment on women's attire because I don't know. But it feels like as we're becoming more serious about business things, the hoodie, t-shirt thing, it's like, no, you need to go back in the office and you need to go talk to customers and you need to look a little more professional because you're running a real business, in quotes.
Yep.
So the lean back towards some look of professionalism seems to be a pattern that I've seen, not at outdoor hot conferences. What about you?
I would see that, and I say this as someone who was working. Like, we're recording this in the Startwell Studios, which is a co-working space. And then I happen to be, I stopped by Highline Beta's space because it was the first time I'd seen it since they got it right before the pandemic. And obviously I check it out. And there was that mix of, you could tell people were trying a little bit. I think the big consideration here is that whether or not you were wearing an approximation of the business clothes you would have worn, and even like in tech before, it was like jeans, t-shirt, and then the blazer meant that you were an entrepreneur. Exactly. Or the Patagonia vest means that you're a VC.
Investor, yeah.
The real change here is that even if you were wearing a facsimile of the clothes that you were wearing previously, it's all stretchy now. You're all wearing, because I wore my outside pants and they were like business looking slacks, but they were mad stretchy, right?
In my head, it's like those tuxedo shirts that have the tuxedo. It's like a t-shirt with 100%. The tuxedo thing printed on it.
Or the 3D printed bows that I used to wear. Right. It's entirely an approximation for comfort. Right. And I think we're cool with that because I think people are now spending most of their time working from home broadly. And
Canada's on fire.
Yes.
So you kind of need to.
Also true. But I will say when we come down to the Startwell, like kind of King and Bathurst area, downtown Toronto, there is a swath of young people that have still gone about living their like urban metro Toronto life. And I'm just looking like, man, they put so much work into going outside. It blows my mind. But I think it's all aligned to comfort and it's athletic gear adjacent. We have like athletic gear business casual now, and I'm as someone wearing my cleaner New Balances for comfort. I am here for it because my body can't take restrictive clothing along a variety of different lenses anymore.
I'm wearing pants.
No, it's not true. You're honestly wearing very similar clothes to what the photo that we shared.
It's true. Shh. I'm totally wearing pants. So let's get back into it. Let's start with a not hardcore one. Douglas, have you again, having been out and about over the last month, outside of AI anything, what problems do you see being solved by Canadian tech right now?
Oh, this is a
very good question.
What problems are being solved by Canadian tech right now? Does Canadian tech aspire broadly? I'm going to piss off every entrepreneur by asking this question. Aspire to solve broad-facing problems. I know one of the things that we talk about is, B2B SaaS. That's a sweet spot for Canadian tech. So obviously, like if you have customers, if you're making money, you're providing value in some format to people. But I would say most of the companies right now, whether it's like a Cohere or otherwise, the companies that are really looking to say, hey, we're a Canadian-based company that's trying to actually make a dent in how global whatever happens, are doing it along an AI lens. Mm-hmm. But it's also really tough. I think it's, to my own point, and to save myself here, I think it is a little fraught to evaluate entrepreneurs based upon, is what you're doing impactful? And I know we come to this from a perspective of, we've had a lot of conversations like, is tech making things better? How is this valuable? At an entrepreneurial level, if you are employing people, if you are making money for a good or service, there is some value exchange there. And I don't think we should judge, particularly like for BetaKit, like we're an independent media publication. We have so many verticals. We don't prioritize the AI story necessarily over the fintech story or the others. Like certainly the clean tech stuff, you want to say that people are solving problems for right now. I think we're looking for leadership in that. But I don't think you judge an entrepreneur based upon what horizon they set themselves for. I think you can add additional kind of accolades for founders that are taking on impact components. I know, like we kind of referenced BDC before. Their whole Thrive program rolled out is like they're going to commit that $200 million, I believe, just to companies that are aligned to the UN's sustainability goals. Right? That's awesome. But I don't like seeing, hey, I don't like evaluating founders based upon whether or not their thing is a bigger deal, because entrepreneurship is hard enough as it is. That being said, the AI people are functionally going to reorder society, whether they intend to or not. And we started this off talking about clean tech, and I don't know if you are paying attention to what's going on in the world. You really should. Like, if we don't get some dingers hit out of that ballpark, we're all in real big trouble.
I think this is kind of arguably our time to shine as Canadian entrepreneurs. This is like not, as a relatively conservative society when it comes to risk taking. Mm-hmm. We've got some, home runs or grand slams or whatever, but there's also, we're good at making shit. We're good at making shit. We're good at making shit that actually has business models that actually goes. And as the appetite for, speculative random stuff wanes for the next few years, this is our opportunity to be like, no, we know how to run a business. I think, I think one pattern that I've seen over the last little while is that, like, just run a fucking business. And the ability for us, hopefully, to be able to run a fucking business is an opportunity for us to actually shine as a society, hire people, actually drive impact. It doesn't have to always be a grand slam. I know it sounds very Canadian for me to say that. I get it. But I think we're actually pretty good at running tech businesses that are actual businesses that actually drive value. And this is our opportunity to do it. It's just, they're not sexy. And that's okay. That's okay to build actual wealth by actually driving impact in our society, but not actually changing the narrative on a particular topic. Not everything has to be disruptive to be a successful business.
Yeah, it's weird. I'm actually going through BetaKit right now, just looking at some of the reporting that we've been doing lately, and there has been stuff in the biotech. Like we're working on a story right now of a Canadian company that's like basically trying to solve some really serious health issues by like sending in little nanobots, like real science fiction stuff, right? So there are very sincere innovations happening. I don't want to undermine that, but I think we're also kind of like, having founded and run companies, if you're making it work and that's what you want to be doing, God bless, man, because it is so hard to be doing this, that to judge or criticize yourself based upon, well, it's not changing the world. Like, screw those people. Now, that being said, maybe to follow this through, we were talking before, you had mentioned about how Canadians maybe look to the government to set policy conditions or leadership for this. Do you think that's correlated to the fact that maybe some of the innovations, things that we're working on, like, I don't see a lot of Canadian companies saying, fuck the rules, fuck the law, fuck the regulation, we're going to do this, and they're going to catch up to us?
Yes.
Do you think this relates to that idea? Like, there's a lot of fintech companies that would love to offer services to the unbanked, underbanked, the Canadians that are living paycheck to paycheck or worse right now, the underrepresented peoples that can't even get banking access. That's really impactful stuff. If they could get the legal framework and to do that, we started off with climate tech questions of like, give us the competitive pacing so that we can get the capital, so that we can stay in Canada to solve the climate crisis. We talk with so many health tech companies. We had a health tech crisis podcast like a month ago, where these companies who want to make care better for Canadians are running up against the cultural or policy driven red tape around this stuff. I'm wondering if maybe that's where the mesh is here of why we seem so government policy focused. It's because we've got a lot of Canadian founders who are unwilling to do illegal or, let's say, gray zone stuff to produce the outcome. We want to play in the defined sandbox. Is that a connection that resonates with you? Because I'm wondering, maybe, if you go to the US, you're like, well, this company's trying to do this stuff, jetpacks for dogs, lasers
look
on
at
sharks.
how Plaid started, right? We're scraping stuff, we're scraping banking, we're putting it in a server that we own and then sending it over to you. That's good for Plaid. They built an amazing business, but that was absolutely not how you want to let that. But we have seen in Canada, I mean, let's go back, to when BetaKit originally started. Remember Lending Loop, or what was the name of the company?
It was Lending Loop.
Peer-to-peer lending was cool. For those kids, go look it up on the Wayback Machine.
And Cato's still out there trying to do now, cross-border banking and transaction stuff, but
but the OSC comes in and smacks you.
So hard,
and then given FTX and the crypto companies in Canada are trying to do a thing. We are not. I don't think our entrepreneurs are not risk takers. I just don't think our culture is set up to accept those risk takers. And then layer on top of that the quickness upon which the regulators are willing to come down and smack them in the face and stop them from being able to do things. Our culture is just not set up to allow for that kind of thing. Unfortunately.
Yeah, I hope we're answering this question in the way that it was intended when it was sent. It's a really great open-ended question. I think we're also trying to balance like the fairness for the people that we know that are working versus like, is this really a problem that needs to be solved? But it's like, man, if there's a market force for that. But I do think maybe there's something that we should investigate more is where are the Canadian entrepreneurs that are willing to say, regardless of what anyone says, I'm going to build this thing. And I don't see that approach and that mentality a lot. I think I'm comfortable saying that amongst Canadian founders. I don't even know if that's necessarily a bad thing.
I think they'll go to the States, right? Like, unfortunately, if you do that, you're like, I'm going to go to market in the States, and that's where I'm going to try to break things, and then get that sheen of viability, and then come back to Canada using the shiny logos.
Yeah, given how much we're talking about like the importance of our government and the need for that, but then also how it's obviously failing to meet the sophistication of the moment, I'm very conflicted about that. Speaking with the competition commissioner recently, speaking with Jesse Wente about just like these various bills that did get pushed through into law that really changed Canadians' relationship with like the internet. I still hope in democracies that government is the place where we like set the win conditions for society and kind of look after each other. That isn't going great. I think if we abandon that, it will never get better. But I understand I will just go to Bermuda and do this thing and build until it becomes legally recognized. You know, having just seen the Oppenheimer film, you know, this is
what happens at the end.
This is not the world literally burns. Spoilers. This is not a new conversation. I think this is probably one of my favorite question of the podcast, just because it's kicked off other thoughts and other conversations that we might have in future episodes. So good job on you, anonymous person, because this person actually might have asked us publicly. We might have just stripped it out. So our bad. But in our hearts, know that A number one. Okay. Maybe paired. This actually question came from SAS North, a SaaS-focused Ottawa-based conference happening later this year, of which we've been a partner of, or someone on the Cube team who didn't realize that they were responding from the SAS North account. So we'll acknowledge that, hey, SAS North asked a question, this is the first time a conference has ever asked us a question on this podcast. And this is kind of an interesting one, kind of focus related to what we were just talking about. So Rob, we all know startups face numerous challenges from funding to scalability. We've been talking about some of that. What golden nuggets of advice? Oh, they are really over-indexing on our capabilities here. Have you snagged from those savvy entrepreneurs and investors for all of our aspiring startup founders out there?
Smiley face.
Yeah, smiley face. It was like, yeah.
Good luck.
They knew what they were doing. This is a plant. But I will allow you, because we've talked a lot about the funding stuff. We've had several conversations that haven't gone up yet, but in a future episode from Startup Fest, with people talking about like the need for diligence and alignment on the venture component. We mentioned before the lack of capital. We did a whole podcast from Startup Fest noting when to take the L, when to admit failure, when to move on from that, what win conditions actually look like, sprinting versus marathon. Where, you know, off the top, where would your go-to piece of advice be right now for founders? I think we get this question on like every public AMA, right?
It's true.
People want that advice.
Can the answer be different? Well, I think, you know, we heard a lot of over the last, I'd say 6 months, like once the economy sort of, the tech economy sort of took a poop, we heard a lot of dry powder. The word dry powder was used a hell of a lot. It's used less nowadays. But I think depending on who you are, don't wait for the dry powder. Don't expect that the dry powder will be deployed as an early stage entrepreneur for you, because what they've been waiting for is you. What they're waiting for is to win. They've got investments. They need those investments to win. The dry powder, if they choose to deploy it, is to double down on their existing investments to make sure they are successful. And the other thing that I've been hearing over the last few months has been, because the AI thing, and this isn't like 2016 AI where everyone just stapled AI to the end of their business and said, we're an AI firm. There were some.
There's still that.
There is that.
But
there's actually clearly, like the dawn of mobile, like there's clearly a shift happening here where we don't know where it's going to end, but there's clearly a material shift in the way that businesses are doing business, where investors, venture investors, have the opportunity to be patient. If they don't need to deploy capital, they don't. If you're a later stage startup, you now need capital. You need, like, am I being obsolesced by AI? Is my business model literally not viable anymore? I have a ton of capital and I have AI that I will actually erase the need for me to exist. So there's this existential questions for those later companies about their growth. And then the early stage companies, well, there's some, mushy foam at the beginning of these companies about, are these adjuncts, like, are they true platforms or are they just features on top of ChatGPT? So as an investor, I think what I've been hearing is you can just sit and wait 6 months. You have no need to deploy your capital at this particular point in time. You're saving your dry powder for the re-upping on the investments you've made so that you can make sure they're successful. And you don't need to be in a rush to deploy the capital that you do have if you have the luxury of a bit of time, because you can let this AI reckoning shake itself out for another 6 months or 5 months before you need to deploy that capital. So be cognizant of the business that you're running, understand the economic conditions you're living in, and we can go at least one level deeper than uh-oh. And then the second point, I think I said in the last question, which is just run a fucking business. Stop worrying about I found what shocks me the most to this day is I continue to advise entrepreneurs, and when you get into their business and you pull back the sheets, they're not actually running a business. They're like, do you have a sales pipeline? Do you know what your metrics are? Do you know how long it takes to convert your thing? Like, go back to business fundamentals.
Yeah.
Like, no, it was not. I was looking actually at the camera over there. I wasn't looking at you. It's run a real business. Think about the unit economics of the business that you're running. Do they make sense? Do you need infinite capital to make this business go? Yes. Think about why you need that to be the case. So if you focus on those things, I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but at least you'll have a rational story to tell, and you can decide what kinds of capital you need and what is the thing that it needs to get you through. Are you seeing similar stories? Is there things that I'm missing that you've seen?
Just that idea, keep having these conversations. There are only a couple funds deploying capital at the earliest stage in Canada. And not so much at the pre-seed stage, or not so much at the following the early stage capital, right? There we just have huge gaps, because when you talk about dry powder in the literal sense, there's only a few ways that dry powder can be used, and it's generally going at some point towards its intended purpose, no matter how long it's been saved. Dry powder as a metaphor for capital is not a one-to-one, because there's no reason why that dry powder that capital needs to be deployed in anything related to what we're talking about. And I think oftentimes the conversations around like dry powder being held back is actually powder being repurposed for other means that have not been marked on the ledger yet. And I think you should be functionally aware of that. To your point, in terms of founders always asking for advice, looking for this, we had Chris Newman from Panache on for an AMA sometime in the last year. And I was able to catch up with him briefly at Startup Fest. He does a lot of content on his blog for early stage founders. I might be participating in some of that, just giving some helpful advice out, which we love doing. But he says, like, the reason why he does that is he feels like Canadian founders are just woefully underinformed relative to the US. For identifiable reason, like, we won't go into that there. But I think they're more looking for guidance than consuming the information and making proactive decisions. And I would say, Rob is indicating a lot of different things that you should functionally be aware of and be learned in, so that if you are to make the choice of jumping off a cliff and building a business, you are directed towards something. You are not waiting for the dry powder to go off, the meteor to hit, or whatever dumb metaphor we want to change this to. So I would strongly suggest that for anyone, like, beyond, like, yes, certainly the fundamentals, but be up in your space, be an expert in the space that you are trying to solve for. And that will give you, if not an advantage relative to competitors or the market, at least not put you in a position of wait and see. Now, maybe we should be saying, if this was a US podcast, create the win conditions, change society and have them react to you. Change the name of the business you spent $40 billion on to a dumb letter that one of your competitors owns the patent for, using an ASCII character or whatever to Unicode character. There's a balance here between preparation and action. But I would say every founder right now would be really well served to know what is happening in the market, how that capital gets from LP investor to VC investor to founder, what's going on in their specific sector, how that sector might be completely evaporated by new horizontal technologies that are changing every sector. That level of preparation, even if you choose to say, we're going to wait and see, fuck it, I'm not betting my family's future on this thing, will well serve you regardless of the choice. And maybe we should take this for future episodes of like, what other market dynamics could we discuss to give a little bit of breadcrumb trails to that understanding?
And also, like, we want to hear from you, both investors,
Yeah.
entrepreneurs. Like, what are we missing?
Where are the gaps in that?
Yeah,
like, specifically, what could we focus on?
This changes over time, right? This is dynamic as well.
Okay. I think we've got a couple other questions people wanted to ask us about, like, Calgary tech scene. We did a whole episode on Alberta tech being hungry. Just check that out. Some cool stuff happening there. Another question on, like, does municipal government support matter? We talked a lot about government support from a federal level. I don't want to get into the municipal stuff too much, but the spoilers here, people that I'm talking to in various cities across Canada, they're way more concerned about how their province supports innovation, because that's where the real dollars can come from than the cities. Mm-hmm. And then we'll close on this. Favorite video game right now? What are you playing?
I'm a loser. I'm still playing Destiny. I'm not playing Diablo, but
you're still playing Destiny.
There was a sale and I got the Lego Star Wars, the Skywalker saga, where you can play all of the Star Wars movies in Lego. I play it with my son.
I'm not hating on that. Those are surprisingly addictive games. Yes. For me, it's all about the Zeldas right now. That is date night for me and my partner. And sometimes I will finish work, come home, I'll come downstairs, and my partner will be like, so I've cooked some elixirs. I got these 5 Korok seeds and I did 1 temple. And it's like, okay, we're just updating each other on our days, right? So
that's very stressful.
Yeah, I will be playing Zelda for probably another 70 or 80 hours because
you have to catch up.
It's a great escape from the world in which we find ourselves. And on that note, if you like these AMA episodes, you know where to find us, podcast at BetaKit. You can submit questions now, not when I embarrass my fellow podcasters with dumb photos of us from Montreal to encourage engagement. Send us a question at any time. And if any of these topics that we discussed are good fodder for a future pod, drop us a line and let us know what you want to see. Because we do it for you. We do it for the pod. We will see you on the next one, hopefully with a special guest that we can once again use as human shield to answer these questions for us.
Ask hard questions next time.